Hello everyone, hello. Let's see. Let me set this up a little bit better. Ah, there we go. That's good. That's good. We are live. Let me make sure that the sound works. Have to refresh here. Hello everyone. Hello. Welcome to SATSANG. Let's see if we got a live going on. There we are. And let me make sure we can hear. Doing the sound check right now. There we go. Now we're muted over here. I'm ready to receive my questions. All right, we are all set. Get some stuff out of the way so it's not quite so cluttered. Hello everyone and welcome. Good to have you here. Maybe you've noticed I have a new picture on the wall of who I regard as the greatest teacher of all time, the Awakened One, and as you all know, I honor the teachings of the Buddha pretty much more than anybody. Kind of my reference, as it were. I'm trusting you can all hear me okay. I have a little microphone up here, so it's not all wired on top of me and the like. As people are arriving, I wanted to talk. I called this particular episode, as it were, the garden, the snake, and God. And it had occurred to me recently, just pondering, as I always do, just the nature of reality and how to best communicate the sense of reality, and to redefine the cultural ideals and the cultural myths that all of us have come with. And for those of us in the West, which is most of us here, not all of us, but most of us, our heritage was one of the three Abrahamic religions, either Muslim or Judaism or Christianity. And what's fascinating is that all three of those traditions have a core set of stories. For instance, the Adam and Eve story in the Garden of Eden is a story that is a part of and integral to all three of those religions. That each interpret it differently, needless to say. But as I was pondering that, it just occurred to me what the garden actually represents. The snake in the garden, and God, the one who brought this whole thing about. And it is an explanation of creation, and also an attempt to mythologically define the origin of human suffering. Right? I want to call it the origin of evil, but it's really the origin of suffering. It's when we were literally kicked out of the garden of pure paradise, and just kind of had to wander aimlessly. It actually starts right in the beginning, where we have, the creation of Adam, and then Adam is split in two, and a rib is taken out of him, and he's made, and a woman was created out of that. There is right in the beginning this sense of a unity that then gets split into separateness. The little child does not have any sense of being a boy or a girl. That comes later, the whole gender thing. There's such a sense of continuity and wholeness and fullness that there's no sense of it belonging to someone, let alone a gender. There's no definition to any of it. It's just the experience of life, the experience of consciousness. And I mean, I've thought that, probably a better rendition of that story is that Eve came first, and and man was birthed from Eve, the original virgin birth, right? And and then ever since, life has sprung from the reunion of the two elements that were never really separated. It's kind of this primal, very beginning, emerging point of a sense of separation. But in the genders, there's a sense of separation and unity simultaneously, which is actually a beautiful metaphor for non-duality. But something happens, right? They're wandering through the garden, right? And they've been told there's this one tree they're not supposed to taste of. And it's the tree of the knowledge, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, if we look at it metaphorically, we're talking about tasting the fruit of that sense of separation. I mean, that's what it is, that which divides right from wrong, good from bad, up from down, truth from error, hate from love. Everything gets put into these camps of opposite, and then we take sides. This is good, this is bad. Okay. Now, what's fascinating is that God is well aware of this and says, you might not want to do that. You might not want to be jumping all over that sense of separation, of that sense of the dualism. But there's a talking snake in the tree. Now, of course, that seems very, very weird, right? Almost like a Disney movie, right? And the flowers are singing and the snakes and the like. But it's actually very telling. Think of it as simply a voice that's saying, "Well, no, this is truth. This is going to open your eyes. This is going to make you be like gods." Well, what is that snake actually, right? Well, what that snake is that voice in your head. That voice you've become so convinced is you, that's the snake. It's not a mythological creature hanging in a tree that's trying to talk you into stuff. That snake is in your own head. That voice you hear, I often refer to it as the robot. You could also refer to it as the snake. In my view, that is actually what this story is pointing at. It's pointing to this inner voice that is not actually you. It is the voice of conditioning. It is the voice of the sense of separation. It is the voice that believes in separation, that believes in the duality, and does not see the interconnection between the two. Whereas the reality of the masculine and the feminine is there's a flow between them. To understand that voice in your head, the one we have gotten so used to believing, and even becomes a problem, isn't you. I often wonder, animals don't have those voices in their heads. Little kids don't have those voices in their heads, right? We so much take it for granted now. But imagine the very first time some human heard a voice in their head, And if you're looking at the evolution of things, right, through apes and pre-humans, and all, at some point, it was probably then that religion was born. What was that? Imagine. We're so used to it now. Matter of fact, now we even think it's who we are. Imagine that first time that's heard. It wasn't actually your voice then. It was simply the functioning of the nervous system as it reached a point where it could apply sounds to objects and begin to identify things. It was the beginning of language. It was the beginning of communication. A useful tool, unless you believe it's actually your voice, rather than what it really is, which is the voice of conditioning. And it is the voice that always represents the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That is, the tree of duality, the tree of separation. It's always saying, you're a separate self. Always. It's never giving you great encouragement. It's never your fan, at least until a certain degree of awakening takes place. And then it does kind of start to switch sides. But in the beginning, not so. Well, I can see the questions are already beginning to flow in, so I'll kind of leave it at that. I think the important thing about that story, and all the attempts I make to give a much more spiritual interpretation and spiritual, the language to the metaphors that we're all used to, is to demonstrate the truth in them, and that they're pointing to something extremely important. The voice they listened to, which is depicted as a snake in the tree, is actually the voice of the egoic mind that is lobbying for you to believe in and agree with separation as your nature. The truth is, we are not separate. We are one. There's only one. And the one that's sitting here speaking, that is the one that is speaking through this form that is sitting here with the mouth moving, is the same one that is hearing through the form that happens to be sitting wherever you're sitting. That is GP, doesn't make this stuff up. I don't know what my next thought is going to be. Most of the time I have no idea what I'm going to say before I start satsang. And there's an idea. You notice sometimes I don't even give it a title because I have no idea what's going to happen. There is the voice of truth that lies within us. And once that is discovered, it kind of takes over the other voice and begins to speak through you. But the need for the inner dialogue, the need for the inner arguments, they just kind of fall to the wayside as you listen less and less to that voice and become more and more aware that you are pure consciousness, and in fact you've never left the garden. You're still there. You were only cast out in your imagination because you believed the voice that was never actually true. So anyway, good afternoon. Inner Aesthetic says hi. Brian in Virginia says hi. Shanika says hi G. Hello to all of you. Ava says namaste GP and everybody. Good to be here. Good to have you. Yes, good sound today. Thank you. Chuck Ash, that's a new one. Hi Chuck. I don't think I've seen you here before. Welcome. Shanika asks, can you say something about Alan Watts, the philosopher, please? Love from England. Brilliant man. I'm not sure he was really an awakened. He was an awakened being. He was not like a fully awakened being. Neither am I. Right? A very powerful intellect, a very strong conviction, and did an enormous amount of good. Very brilliant. I love listening to his talks. I love listening to the talks of very well-educated, very well-read people, because it puts me in contact with a level of conversation and depth that I just can't dredge this stuff up on my own. I like listening to Terence McKenna for exactly the same reason. There are people I like listening to. I like reading Osho. although Osho was a bit crazy. So yes, Alan Watts has a great deal of wonderful things to say. I mean, I've heard some Zen masters criticize him because they said, well, yeah, it's great. He talks about Zen, but his butt's never hit a cushion, right? He never really had that kind of a meditative practice and the like. So is that absolutely necessary? I don't know. I know some other people that it doesn't have to be there. There's no one way to get to awakening. As a matter of fact, there's no way you can get to it. It's awakening is an accident, but with a little bit of guidance, you can make yourself more accident prone. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We can begin the process of the alleviation of suffering, which is really what it's all about, and cultivating happiness before the skies part and the angels sing. So I hope that answers your question. If there's something more specific, I listen to him, but I probably don't know any more about him than you do. So thanks. Ivan, hello from Bulgaria. Hello, Ivan. Chris Skills. Hello, Chris. Hello, GP. Can you give your opinion on the psychological mind? In reality, I don't have a psychological mind, because who is the I that has one? There is just mind, and am aware of the mind. Is this right, G? Should we just observe the psychological mind and see it for what it is without getting caught in its activity? This is a big subject. I could talk the rest of our 2 hours together on that subject. Where to start? Well, the first half of your question, should we observe it without getting caught up in its activity? The answer is absolutely yes. Yes, you should. In fact, you can't help it, right? We are observing it, right? The problem isn't that we're not aware of it or observing it. The problem is we're identified with it. We think that the psychological mind is who we are. But let's break it down, right? What we call mind is an abstraction. It's a word, right? There's no such thing. There's not an entity mind. And people will say that, oh, my mind is bothering me. I can't stop my mind from making all these thoughts. Well, there's no mind bothering you. There's no mind making thoughts. There's not an entity there generating thoughts. There are only thoughts. And the process of thoughts as they move and change and also how they kind of tend to organize themselves around recurring themes, repetitive themes really, we name that mind. And that's really all it is. We have named what in fact is a complex functioning. We've given it a single word to represent complex functioning, because it's like we talk about a flock of birds rather than describing every individual bird and where they are in the pattern and all that. The same thing is true of thoughts. The flow of thoughts, which is just something happening in nature, is what we have named mind. Now here's what happens though, and it's simply the way the mind, the flow of thought, the way thought organizes itself works. It is thought that named itself mind, right? Because it works in levels of generalization, right? So I could say generalization, I can talk about dogs, and I'm talking about dogs. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I can get more general, Chihuahuas or Labradors or Dobermans, right? And I could talk about all the dogs in, Seattle, right? And then I could talk about a particular dog, right? These are generalizations. So there's a dog, and then there's different types of dog. They're all dog. The word dog is simply a generalization. That's all it is, to represent all dogs, right? But we abstract that, right? So the word mind is simply a word that represents all thoughts and the flow of thoughts. But the moment that becomes a word, That word is what's called an abstraction, right? So we have abstracted this very complex thing into a very simple thing that we can all talk about. But it's a funny thing the way thought works. The moment something becomes a thing, we immediately begin to invent stories about it. It's as if it becomes a thing in and of itself rather than just a word representing something else. And so now mind becomes problem mind, egoic mind, psychological mind, unconscious mind, subconscious mind, superconscious mind, divine mind, right? All of those are all made up stories about a very simple thing, but that's the nature of abstractions. And if those get complicated enough, we'll make another level of abstractions on top of that until you get a universe, right? One word, a universe. A universe, you know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah. Really? The entire universe? Right? It includes everything I know and everything I don't know and everything I could know and everything I'll never know. And we call that universe. And then we say, oh, the universe is benevolent, or we say, I'm, the genie of the universe, or the universe gave me, or I'm trying to attract things from the universe, as if there was actually a thing there. There's no thing. There's only functioning. And this complex functioning, there's no self, right? The self is you, the real you, and you have projected your selfhood on that which is just a function. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because I just this morning, as I was meditating, I was sitting by the sound and I was meditating, and I could see the selfness of everything. Because I can talk about a tree, right? And the tree is like, there's an individual sense of it to it. There's like a selfness to it, or a beingness to it. But in fact, I could actually stand back then and talk about a forest in exactly the same way. But the forest doesn't exist without the trees within it. Yet at the same time, I can give the forest a sense of, I think I can talk about the black forest, I can talk about, right? Black forest cake. I can do, are you following me on this? Because it's very subtle. The natural sense of self is to shower everything with the sense of beingness, with an aliveness, with the sense of selfness. Right? The mistake is thinking that the selfness is actually in what you're perceiving, rather than reflecting back the self that's actually perceiving. That the object you're perceiving doesn't have a self, right? The forest doesn't have a self, does it? A city doesn't have a self. We can talk about the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame and Musée d'Orsay. I forgot, I can never pronounce that. D'Orsay, Musée d'Orsay, and the Louvre, right? But what's Paris? Well, it's just a combination of all these things. And then what's the Louvre? Well, the Louvre is nothing except, well, it's a palace and it's got a lot of art in it. Oh, well, that's what makes it the Louvre, right? So as you begin to just really you see that nothing itself has an inherent self, right? And yet there's definitely a form there. It's like an entity, but its entityness, its selfness, is a reflection. It isn't a self. It reflects the self. Like we talk about moonlight. Well, the moon generates no light, right? It is simply reflecting part of the sun's light, and yet we write poems about it. We fall in love underneath it, right? We howl at it, right? And yet there's nothing there. It's just the light, and of course it completely disappears in the fullness of the actual sun itself. And so, I think I'm still answering your question, although I know I'm really going off into a because it's just really, it's really, really important. Because the moment you say, okay, I've got to just observe the psychological mind, you've created a psychological mind, right? You are now interpreting the experience of thought as if it were a psychological mind. But there is no psychological mind there. What you're looking at is certain patterns of thought. Certain patterns of thought form around everything. If they form around the sense of I, we call it the ego, the ego. Now there's a thought I, and that thought begins to collect stories around it. I mean, that's the creation of the separate self, the sense of I, which is obvious, right? I mean, you have a sense of your own existence, which is the sense of I, a sense of your beingness. But the thought then, I, begins to, well, it's this and this and this and this, but in fact the I doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It's just a word to represent the kind of functioning that is this particular form. And that's it. That's all it matters. And it's a nice point of reference. I can say I instead of Buddha, right? Although I could very easily reverse them, right? Actually, but I won't go there right now. Is that helping, Chris? Please let me know. It's a beautiful question, and I probably answered it differently than you were expecting. I mean, the short answer is yes. Just observe it. But the deeper answer is to don't just observe it, which is just kind of sit back, and then underneath there's kind of this whole idea that you hope you're going to become separate. You're going to like see through it. Instead, see through it. Okay, what is this psychological mind? This thing that I am not getting caught up in an activity. Why? Why wouldn't you get caught up in activity? Because there's some kind of spiritual teacher has promised you some kind of candy at the end, right? Some kind of special payoff? Or do you not get caught up in its activity because it's not actually presenting what's real? Right? But there's nothing wrong with the flow of thoughts. But the moment you begin to identify the flow of thoughts, give it a sense, an identity and a sense of entity, you've created a separate entity where there isn't one. Is that clear? When I call it the psychological mind, can you see how you're actually creating an entity that you have to not get caught up in? But the whole thing is your own creation. It doesn't actually exist except within your consciousness. I mean, the whole thing is mind, right? Psychological, unconscious, subconscious, the whole thing. Right? So you want to see that you've never been caught up in its activity because there's never been a real entity called a psychological mind, nor has there been an entity called myself that has gotten caught up with it that now has to somehow get uncaught by it. That's never happened. Right? That too is simply an image playing out. It's just a set of thoughts. Come back to center. Come back to the place from which it is all being observed. And you'll see how what we call the mind is simply the creative power of consciousness creating worlds. World upon world upon world upon world upon world. Is this helping, Chris? God, I hope so. Rohan says, hello from South Africa. Hello, Rohan. So great to have you here. South Africa. I think you're the first guy from South Africa and the only one at this point. I had somebody else from someplace else in Africa. Well, it's James Breeden. Hello, GP. I hope that you and everyone in the chat are doing well. Blessings. Thank you very much. Dave and Elaine. Hi, folks. Hi, GP. Greetings from a beautifully sunny southeast England. Good to see you. Beautiful. Beautiful. I really want to get back to England. I love it there. I just so love it there. There's some little island in Ireland that was like trying to get, they've invested in, there's like 500 people in the whole town, on the whole island, and they invested in all sorts of high-end, high-tech internet connections, and they're actually inviting people to come and live there, including Americans. I was thinking, That doesn't sound like such a bad idea. Let's see. RB. I've never really heard you speak on astral projection, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences. What are your thoughts on it? Is it beneficial? Heard. Sorry. Hard you speak. Oh, right. Heard. I got heard. I actually have. The question has come up before. What I always like to encourage people, every experience has value. I never deny, say, this experience, you shouldn't have that. You should never do that. People ask me about plant medicine and ayahuasca and the like. And it's like every path is legitimate. Everything has something to offer. Everything brings you to the door. But it's only this kind of inquiry that takes you through the door, right? I mean, everything, if it's valid, will bring you to the point of recognizing that things aren't the way you think they are. They will break down your ideas about, about the hardcore nature of reality. Sorry, kids playing outside the window. So I shut the window. Anything that breaks that down is valid, and all of those things, including astral projection and out-of-body experiences. Now the question is, what actually happens? Right? Now notice. Now I'm going to be speaking from a non-dual perspective here. The idea of having astral projection or out-of-body experience assumes that you are something in the body, right? Now, if that's the case, my immediate question is, well, that's great. Then what is it? Who are you then? What is it that goes out there and is projected? I basically ask the same question when people talk about living multiple lives. They say, okay, well, in the last life you were this. Maybe you were even, different gender or race or anything, right? And this you were something else, and this you were something else. And every single one of those times, you believed that's who you were. And now you're in this one. Right. So if we've gone from body to body to body, who are you? You're obviously not that body. You're something else. And while people get really into the experiences, because they're fun, they're interesting, and the like, they miss the deeper question. Which is, well, if I'm having this completely gone experience out of a completely different reality that I'm experiencing, well then, who am I, right? If my whole reality has just shifted on me, and my sense of identity has been rooted in thinking that this was real, well, who am I? And that's the question I want to bring you back to. If you are leaving your body, who are you then? Then you're clearly not your body, right? Which means that all the identification with the body you need to let go of. Gender, age, birth, death, memories, associations, characteristics, everything that you think you are, you're not, right? It's not like there's like this more, spirit-like thing inside of you that looks like you, or a little bit, probably younger and better looking. Keep hoping we're going to go to heaven, leave the body behind, and when we get to heaven, we're going to have like these nice, supple, gorgeous 25-year-old bodies, right, for eternity. You're not your body, right? That's not what's going on, right? So when you have an experience of being out of the body, isn't it possible that you're simply having an experience of being in the body? You assume that you're locked in here, right? And that I'm in here, but I'm going to have an experience of out there and I have to return here. Well, maybe you started out there and you're having the experience of being in here, right? I mean, where are you on this continuum? Notice that we say out-of-body experience, we have this assumption about our bodies and our relationship to our bodies and who we are. What I invite you to do is go, whoa, wait a minute. What does this actually mean? Maybe I've never been in the body, Actually, I left. I went back to actually what I really am, and I'm having an in-body experience. The disembodied me is having an in-body experience. That's actually closer to the truth. does does that help, RB? Hopefully I twisted your noodle a bit. Remington, my man. GP, I missed your answer 2 weeks ago to a question of mental illness, awakening, and meditation. If the prism is cracked, how far can one go, even if they're at the water and trying to drink? No matter what is being experienced, even if it's really harsh, like like a mental illness or a physical illness, is there not still something aware of it? Yes, when I do satsangs like this, I am talking to, stable, relatively, relatively healthy minds, right? You're not suffering from mental illnesses, although everybody here is suffering from some degree of suffering, right? Of some sort. So the prism is never cracked, right? Awakening is awakening to what's always been, awakening to the awakeness that's here right now. Are you not awake to what I'm saying? Now you have this idea that you're not awake. You form some idea of what enlightenment and awakening is. It doesn't match this experience, right? So when I get to that experience, then I'll be awake. But will the awakeness be any more awake having the awakening experience than it is with the totally asleep experience? If you look at the actual nature of experiencing itself, you find that it's always present. It has no mental illness, it has no problems. It is aware of all problems, whether they be mental or emotional, but it itself has none. It is simply the awareness that makes you aware of anything. When the sense of identity returns back there, that's what we refer to as awakening. That's conscious awakening. That means I'm awake and I know it. Right now, you're awake and you don't know it because you keep thinking it's going to be something else other than what is right here, right now. Are you or are you not awake? Are you and are you not conscious of my words? Is that not consciousness? Do you think there's some other special, secret state, that at some point, I'm going to whip out the magic formula and go, here you go. This is it. This is real consciousness, not this one. Consciousness is the same. The experience changes, consciousness doesn't. You're conscious right now. When you realize that the consciousness you are right now is the consciousness, the only one there's ever going to be, boom, that's it. You're awake. That is, you're consciously awake to the awakeness that's always been there. Right? You're conscious now of the consciousness that's always been there. It's that simple, right? But the mind keeps going, yeah, well, it's got to look like this. It's got to have, flowers and dancing girls and angels singing and, avatar special effects and all of that kind of stuff. No, all of that will be witnessed by consciousness. The most, huge and elaborate awakening story will be witnessed by what? Consciousness, of course. And then you go, oh my God, it's ordinary. It's what's always been here. It's not a quality of experience. It's the medium through which all experience is known. It isn't a particular kind of experience. It is experiencing itself. And that's when the body begins to relax, the seeking begins to end. Not all at once, by the way. That tendency to want to go to it, it's still there. I feel it, right? Hey, great experience, right? So, yeah, it'll be a great experience, and then it'll be over. and I'll go, oh, I want to get back to I was enlightened, and now I'm not. Not true. Every one of you is awake. Every one of you is conscious. Are you not? Are you not hearing my voice? That's consciousness. Boom. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now you notice how the mind wants to go off somewhere else. It wants, well, this can't be it. But what you're doing is comparing your current experience which doesn't seem to, be as interesting as some big experience of some sage. And you're saying, oh, I'm not awake. He's awake. Well, but where's that? what is knowing that? What is knowing this little debate going on? Am I awake? Am I not awake? Am I not? What's knowing that? Is that ever asleep? Is that knowingness ever asleep? Look there. Pay attention to that. Because that's it. That's all there is to this. This is not a big deal. By the way, thank you to everyone who is liking and sharing this. This is I'm very happy about that. Let's see, Ursula. Hello all, Ursula from Madeira Island in Portugal. Hello, Ursula. Starlight Glimmer, love that name. What does Jesus' death and resurrection represent? Whoa. And did it actually happen so that he could teach his followers, or was it just a story made up later? And does the second question matter, or is it irrelevant if it happened or not? That is excellent, because no, it doesn't matter. Because it's not the historical accuracy or inaccuracy that gives the story its power. It's the meaning behind it. I mean, there's all sorts of stories about Jesus. A good friend of mine sent me a huge book called What Jesus Said, or What Did Jesus Say? And it was a very scholarly approach. There's 70 scholars that participate in this to try to break down of all of the things that Jesus was attributed to Christ, him saying, that what did he actually say? And what was added later, what was, inserted on it, what was put in it, for political expediency, all the things. Now the fundamentalists will completely deny that. No, we got to take it just as it is. But it was fascinating because of all the things that Christ actually said. Only 13% of it was agreed on by the scholars that he actually said it. There was another 20%, it was around 20%, they said, it's likely he said it. It's close, but, not certain. It could have been added, which leaves 67% going, very unlikely that he did, or he didn't, period. There's just no way he said that. We can even tell you where that came from. The particular group of people that had their particular political or religious point of view inserting it, different kind of cadence, language, the way they, it's very fascinating the way they did it. So, did that actually happen? I have no idea. I have to take it metaphorically, because whether it happened or not, the actual happening of it historically is almost completely irrelevant to me. The fundamentalist point of view is that the historical accuracy is everything about that, because that makes Jesus the great exception. Not the great example, but the great exception. He wasn't a teacher. He was just coming here to show you he was the miracle man. Believe on me. That was it. That's the whole premise of it, which I think is complete hogwash. So it's about what it actually means. And the death and resurrection means the death of the ego, or the death of the sense of a separate self, and the birth of the original innocence, the original you, the return to the garden, right? The antidote for the snake in your head is the death of the snake. And the death of the snake is the resurrection of your innocence. That's to me what it actually means, what it's pointing at. And the crucifixion of the cross is a beautiful metaphor, which is, he used the metaphor of the cross long before he was put on one for his death. And the cross appears in all sorts of different cultures, including Native American with the four directions and all of that. So it's a very ancient, predates Christ by thousands of years, and appears in cultures that had no contact with each other either, which means it's something inherently human, and it simply means the center of the universe, and that Christ was crucified in the center of the universe, and the center represents the king, and the king represents the crossroads of all beings. I won't get into the mythological stuff. You can read Joseph Campbell and a few others to pick up on that, because it's very very fascinating. But you can see these myths that were reflected there. But the real point of it was the utter willingness of Christ to do whatever was necessary for the complete and total dissolution of the ego, including allow his body to be killed. He did. Notice it said he opened not his mouth. He offered no defense. He did not try to defend himself. He didn't say I was false. Nothing. He was very quiet throughout the entire thing. He would answer Pilate's questions, but he offered no defense. He simply completely surrendered himself to the wisdom of unfolding events, and obeying his own words, which I wish every Christian would obey, which is not my will but thine be done. That statement, not my will but thine be done, is the antithesis of the ego. The ego can't do that. Yeah, your will be done as long as I get what I want, as long as I'm okay. The ego wants enlightenment. The ego wants to be there. The ego wants to be resurrected, but that's the whole point. It can't, because it doesn't exist. That's the real meaning behind it. The egoic mind does not exist as an entity. We have made it into a functioning thing, an entity, by our belief in it. And the ego, of course, that's the devil. That's the snake, right? And in the book of Revelation, this snake is now bloated to be the great red dragon in heaven, ready to devour the child the moment it's born. The child representing your perfect spiritual innocence. So I hope that answers for you. It's very deep, and I could go on about it for a very long time, but the essential meaning of it is simply this: surrender to your life. Anthony de Mello said beautifully, enlightenment is total surrender to the inevitable. Christ simply surrendered to the inevitable. He didn't put up a fight. We do. Now we when I say things like that, people get a little bit reticent, and I agree, you should. This doesn't mean you kind of roll over and let everybody roll all over. You should do everything you can to defend yourself, protect yourself, take care of yourself. But when you can't, right? When you've run out of moves, surrender to it. Don't think something's wrong. Don't think I did something wrong. I messed up. I'm not attracting. I'm not vibrating on the right level. That's the ego. Really? Trust in the wisdom of circumstances. Believe me, that never changes. I'm going through something right now. It's like I'm completely bewildered. I don't know what to do. It means an enormous amount to me, but all the avenues are closed. And what do I do? There's nothing I can do except surrender. That surrender, that willingness to surrender, is not coming from the egoic mind. It can't. The ego cannot surrender. Its surrender is its demise. Again, I'm talking about the ego as if it is an entity. It's not. It's only an entity because we believe in it. And sometimes it takes us running out of moves before we let go of our belief in it. And then we discover that it seems to be active in the nervous system, in the body, and as well as in thought. And it is. It is an activity. It is a function, right? Primarily, it's the function of resistance, but it's not a thing. And so we're literally dying to the false sense of self. The false sense of self is dying, and being resurrected to the truth of our being, which of course is deathless. So, it's a great metaphor for that which never existed, which was never born, and that which never dies. That's what it really represents, just as the virgin birth represents exactly the same thing, right? It represents that which was never born and is never going to die. This just the spontaneous arising of reality in the midst of what appears to be unreality. Oof. I could go on about that, but I think I'll let that go for now. How's that? How is that, Starlight? Thank you for that question. As I've mentioned before, I cannot tell you how utterly delighted I am to see the level of quality of the questions that have been coming up. When I first started doing this stuff, I first did that radio show, 6 years ago, something like that. I was not getting these kind of questions. It was like, how can I make more money? How can I get better? It was all, law of attraction, manifestation kind of stuff. And I'm trying to guide people in. So believe me, the quality of these questions is doing my heart good, because I really don't want to go back to trying to tell people how to make a better living. I'd really rather not. So, but again, not my will, but thine be done. Thank you, Starlight. RB says, what's the difference between inner knowing, intuition, and the voice in your head? The inner knowing and intuition is not a voice. It's a recognition. And we all can do it. The voice speaks. Who's hearing the voice? Right? That's knowing. Knowingness hears the voice. Right? There's something else, it's silent, it's not a voice, that recognizes the truth of one thing and the falsity of another. We call that intuition, but in fact, what that is the truth. That is God. That's the indivisible, right? That which is not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? That sense of knowing is always there, and it's what knows everything. See, we have become indoctrinated and come to believe that knowing means I have the right thoughts about things. Then I know what that is. I've identified it collectively. It's this, and this. And somebody else, no, it's not this, and this. It's this, and they argue and debate, maybe fight each other over it, right? What's true is the knowingness. And both are sharing it, both having identical experience at the level of knowingness, but what's being experienced is identical, but the thoughts about what is being experienced are not. And one is just asserting more than anything, well, this is what is. Knowing is simply that which is perceived, the fact that you notice there's a voice at all. If that wasn't there, there'd be no voice, right? That's consciousness. That's self-awareness. That is the self, the I am. It recognizes everything. And it goes deeper than that, because it can recognize that the voice isn't really telling me the truth, or this voice is uncomfortable. Ooh, I'm feeling this something doesn't seem right. Now notice that that's not a voice, right? Is it? It's a sense. And I don't want to even call it a feeling or a sensation. It's something else altogether. It's knowingness. It's knowing itself as knowing. I know that sounds kind of abstract, but that's what it is. It's awareness aware of itself, right? That is awareness, completely aware of everything that's going on and aware of the quality and value of everything that's going on. That's truth. When you see something and know that it's false, how do you know that? That's truth. You simply know. We call it intuition, right? But that's only, we call it that because we've kind of personalized it. I had a sense about that. Well, who's that I that had that sense? And can you separate yourself from that sense? The more you look at it, you find that that sense of knowing and yourself are one and the same. There's not two there. And that even the sense that there's a me that has a knowing is itself being known, is being seen, is being perceived. The sense of being someone who knows is itself a set of thoughts and not actually what's happening, and is not actually you. How's that for you, RB? Cameron Zucchi. Hey GP, wonderfully said about how your voice in the head gets pushed to the wayside by your true voice, by your true voice. Hello from California. Hello Cameron. Great to have you here. Yes, The true voice is not a voice. It's not blah, 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 blah. Thank God, right? Because this is eternal and infinite and constant, right? It'd be constant. There'd be a constant chatter. The true voice is silence. Your true being is silence. And voices come, voices go. You know, different voices come, different voices go. Believing, and you just know they're just voices in your head. That's the snake. They don't really matter, right? They're sometimes useful, right? But they don't really matter. And they come and go, don't they? And you don't. Well, then they're obviously not you. It's so simple. Let's see, Dale Kinghorn, right? Yeah. Hello, GP. I prefers do not be around other beings much, a lot of the time. Then do really suddenly. What's up with that? Also keep having nihilistic moods. Think is part of process. Hard to make coherent sentences when you have a limited amount. Very good. You know, sometimes, God, I just love just being completely isolated and alone. Other times, you know, other times I don't. I mean, it's right, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You know, the problem is when we isolate ourselves because we're afraid of others, because we're curmudgeon, right? We don't like others, or we want to be around others to keep ourselves, you know, busy, occupied, distracted, because we don't want to be with our own feelings. That's only the problem. There's no right or wrong to it, you know. Sometimes I just love being. This morning, I was up very early this morning. I went out to the sound and I sat and meditated, right? And it was wonderful, just me. There was nobody around, and I will do that often. But then, you know, I'll go hang out with my son and you know, and granddaughter and like. Sometimes if I go out to eat, I usually sit at the bar because it's just too isolated sitting by the table. There's something very natural about we humans that we want contact with each other, even if it's impersonal contact, right? There's, you know, there's a communal aspect to us, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's why we need sanghas and churches and temples and that sort of thing. Because it's all part of it. The moment you make one thing right and another thing wrong, and a particular behavior right and another behavior wrong, is when you get into trouble. As long as you're simply following it, the natural impulses of the flow of life, you're on base. You're good, right? So there's no problem. There's no problem with sometimes you want to be around people, sometimes you want to be as far away from them as you possibly can. That happens. Sometimes I just want to just take me to the other planet, right? Come, take me away. I don't care. Probe me. I don't mind. Just take me out of here. Other times it's just I'm just, you know, relishing the presence of others. So everything unfolds very, very naturally. It's only when we start creating stories about what should or should not be happening that we get into trouble. Drop all of that. Drop all of your argument with what is happening and just be with what is happening, however that happens to feel in the moment, and you are there. You are in the flow. You are like right on the verge of total awakening. So, thanks, Dale. Thank you very much. Dave and Elaine. Love you guys. Oops. And you just disappeared. Oh, there we go. Papa G said that rather than being an advantage, years of spiritual practice could be an obstacle to self-realization, as it reinforced the sense of a separate self on a path to a perceived goal. With each step perhaps taking one further away from the knowing of the true self. Would you agree? Yes, it can very much work that way. I don't think it's avoidable. I mean, pretty much everybody becomes a seeker, right? Papa G was a seeker. He went to see Ramana. I mean, his ideas of what it was supposed to be, and he actually wanted to try to discredit him because he had his ideas of the way things be, but he had a very different experience awaiting for him. Every single sage, with a few exceptions, were seekers, right? And then the seeking ended. It's a very natural progression when, for whatever reason, our lives aren't working, right? And we've tried a bunch of stuff and then we just can't make them work. And for some reason, something begins to dawn on you of that there may be more to this. Just things begin to appear. Well, that's very natural, right? That's consciousness expanding. That's consciousness beginning to recognize itself, to be able to see it. This direction isn't doing it. Where do I go? And that, of course, is the opening, the flowering, that allows in more spiritual teachings to happen. And sometimes those spiritual teachings can be more religious. Sometimes it can be personal development, some in self-help, and sometimes, and always eventually, it gets to non-dual inquiry, right? As the seeker. But you're absolutely right. Eventually, you begin to see that even the seeking itself was a subtle way in which the sense of a separate self was keeping itself around. Now, you can't just stop it. You have to see through it. You go, I see. So my self-image now is of a spiritual person being spiritual, trying to be more compassionate and loving, which, by the way, are all good things to do. I'd much rather be in a room full of well-behaved egos than arrogant, self-aggrandizing egos. Like, I'd hate to sit in Congress, right? Because that's all there is, or the Parliament for you guys, because that's all there is, right? But it's okay to just do something morally for behavior. But again, you're now just a person trying to be a better person. You haven't really seen the issue. Even when people get into non-duality, I mean, you can even see squabbles and stuff amongst non-dual adherents, because having grasped the essential idea that even the seeker now is a sense of identity. I'm a seeker, right? So I don't do that. I do this. But eventually that'll be seen through. Eventually the right teacher will show up in whatever form. It might be a teaching, it might be a book, it might be an audio, it might be an experience, or it might be an actual person sitting here talking to you. But eventually they show up and begin to point out to you that the real nature of the structure of how an identity works, and then point you back to the place from which even the seeker is being seen, right? And that which is aware of the seeker isn't seeking. What is there to seek? And then the seeker begins to just kind of dissolve. And the feeling of seeking begins to dissolve. Not completely, because there's still the natural sense of growth, there's the natural sense of evolution, there's the natural sense of seeking more and more opportunities for self-expression, but it doesn't have the same kind of grasping to it. It becomes very, very, just very, very calm, very equanimitable. Very equanimous, actually, I think is the right word. It's just everything takes on a different flavor, and the seeking just begins to fall away because there's really nothing to seek, right? You realize that the seeking itself had at its roots the presumption that I was separate. Now, folks, the truth is either you're separate or you're not. You can't be separate and then become one. Two cannot become one. We have to imagine that the one is two, right? But if it really is two, they cannot become one. That's impossible. We can imagine that one has become two, right? And then, of course, because we believe it to be two, we try to bring them back together. I'm not separate, I'm not separate, I'm not separate, which, of course, is impossible. And so we realize that, oh, I've never been two. There's only always been one. So I don't have to try to make two one. I don't have to reunite with God. God is all there's ever been. And that's the end of seeking. Right? I highly recommend it. But be patient. Be so patient and loving with yourself as it unfolds, because I know both of you have had that insight, right? But there's still a sense of being separate. There must be more for me to get. Actually, there isn't. What you're really doing is sinking more, abiding in that truth. That's what Vichara means. That was what Ramana Maharshi was pointing to, what we call self inquiry. Actually, self-abiding. To just abide as the self, and more recognize that as the self, you are simply recognizing the activity that you used to be identified with. But it's going to be here. There are going to be feelings of separation arising. It's inevitable. The young child, which is living in a constant state of undifferentiated consciousness, the sense of separation arises. The thing is the child does not know that it's not true, and because their parents and stuff are reinforcing it. But even if their parents were awakened, it would still have to go through that, right? It may not have as much overhead, but it's still going to have to go through. Everybody experiences that. Voice starts talking, we think it's us. It happens to absolutely everyone. And so even awake, it's going to arise, but you're just not. You just don't fall for it anymore. You say, I get it, but it's not a thing. It's not a real snake, a real entity, a real ego trying to trip you up. That's a big mistake, and can actually cause a lot of suffering where there doesn't need to be. But you'll see that it's still quite active. It's active in feelings, it's active in thoughts, it's active in sensations. The entire range of experience will still seem to point to that. But the less and less tricked you are, the less and less time and energy and credibility you give to it, eventually, if there's nobody in the audience, the actors just don't bother. They don't come out because there's nobody there to hear the story. Does that help you guys? Does that answer your question? Thank you. Ducks. Hey, GP. Hey, ducks. Is it pointless to dissect the ego and its many sides and faces? I think a more direct approach may be viable. We get to the source and not spend any time analyzing. Am I right? Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah. Would you agree? Yeah. Yes, I would agree with that. You don't need to analyze. There's nothing there to analyze, right? You need to inquire, but that's not analysis. You need to look very closely. What is the ego, right? If you're studying the ego, it's endless because it's not anything in particular. It's just constantly morphing into something else because there's nothing really there. Functioning is just happening. And so because it's imaginary and is projected on functioning, it has no roots, right? So it's not like you can go, there it is, there's the ego, got it, right? I got it, where'd it go? Oh, got it, right? It's the Artful Dodger. It's all over the place because there's nothing really there, right? So when we understand the actual nature of the ego, that it's just a thought projected upon the natural functioning of life, that's all the inquiry that needs to happen. Now we turn our attention inward to just notice all the places where we have believed it to be an entity and it wasn't. All the places in thought, in emotion, and also in sensation. Because all of those have been engaged and programmed and conditioned to act as if it actually was an entity, that I was actually that. And this is where the only problem is. And it's happened even after awakening. It continues to happen. In fact, you can actually wake up and this won't change at all. And a lot of people that wake up, I see, and then fall back down again, not realizing what's actually happening. They just haven't, been properly shown what's actually going on. So they have that opening experience of just pure divinity, but then it seems like the aperture closes down again. So I totally agree. Make sure you understand what the actual nature of the self, of the ego is, and the self, but what the ego is, But don't analyze the ego on its terms. Never engage with the ego in its game, because it'll have you spinning in circles because it's a moving target. There's nothing there to grasp, right? Once you see that, it's just a particular flavor of activity that I have projected selfness on. I'm the self. It cannot exist without me. I can very easily exist without it. Does that answer it for you, ducks? Ann Kaufman. Hey, Ann. Better late than never. Yep, I agree. Good to be here. Love our satsangs, our Sunday satsangs. So do I. Chris Gill says, thanks for that, GP. I'm just trying to not get lost in thoughts and just stay as the self and see thought activity as just a phenomenon that's happening. You know, it's a very subtle thing that you're pointing at, right? No, you don't want to get lost in thoughts and stay as the self. What I would urge you to do, notice that very subtly, there's a seeker there. Very subtly, there's someone who's getting lost in thoughts trying to stay as the self. Can you be anything other than the self? Which means that the one trying to not get lost in thoughts and stay as the self is itself a thought appearing in front of the pure awareness, the pure lens of awareness. Notice that. You don't have to stay free from thoughts. Who you are is always free from thoughts. You are sustained by the truth. You don't have to try to sustain truth. Right? Now, then it would become a discipline of making myself think correctly all the time. Law of attraction people do that all the time and they just drive themselves mad. You can't. Buddha couldn't do it. Nobody can do it. Ramana Maharshi couldn't do it. Nobody can do that, right? Because the mind doesn't do that. The mind won't sit still that long. It's like scolding a puppy, right? It's like, forget it. It's not gonna happen. But just notice how you've very subtly identified with the thought that says, I'm trying to go beyond my thoughts. That's just a thought. You are beyond your thoughts. The beyond your thoughts is what's witnessing that particular scenario. As I said before, even with awakening, things are still active in thought and feeling and sensation. They are. The sense of a separate self, which is just a sense. It's not an actual separate self. It's just a sense. It's an interpretation of experience. Right? So that's still there. And it's going to do stuff like that. It's going to say, yeah, okay, well, we've got to really, we're going to dig in now. I can see this. We're going to dig in and we're going to keep our thoughts and we're going to never go back. It's like that. It's like, oh, good God. Oh, you'll wear yourself out, my friend. You don't need to do that. You are the self. The fact that you are the self is what's moving you. It's what brought you here. So that the self could hear the self speaking. So you could hear yourself being reflected back to you, right? To see through what you apparently can't see through. It's simply becoming conscious. Oh, I am the self. This is the experience of the self. This is it. There's nothing beyond that. There's no place you need to get to. And you're just going to become more and more subtle and more aware and actually more and more funny. Because it is a bit of a cosmic joke. A joke that I played on myself. It's a joke God played on herself. A real knee snapper. Yeah. Thanks, buddy. Patang. Yeah, my friend in Israel, right? I think that's correct, yeah. Hi, GP, good evening. Because they ate with the advice of the snake, ego mind, from the tree of knowledge, good and evil. Adam was punished by that he would have to work for his livelihood. Isn't that something? And Eve was punished that she would have to suffer pain while in labor. They're both banished from paradise. Yes, that's exactly how the story goes. And The punishment was self-punishment. God didn't do it, right? Right? The moment that happened, God now became pulled out of the essence of it. God became a separate being. And all the goodness got projected on God, and all the badness got projected on me. This new me that didn't exist before, that came into existence as a result of eating the fruit recommended by the snake. Oh, eat it. It's good for you. Taste it. You'll love it. It's really, really good. It's liver. It's spinach. You'll love it. I hated spinach as a kid. Now I eat it every day. But so yes, and the end result was, well, the moment the separate self arises, there's a fear of death, right? And there is a fear of lack, and that's depicted in the Bible. That in that moment they knew fear and shame. Whoa! Because that separation, they were separated from their essential goodness, essential nature. Now you can't really separate someone from their essential nature. So it said their eyes were opened, right? Well, they got opened, all right, but not to their essential nature. Their eyes went from here to there. They were open externally. They were now looking at a world and interpreting the world, and what is this world? And their place in it. And of course, their place in it now is coming from the sense of being a separate self. This happens in childhood to every single one of it. It's a beautiful metaphor for it, and I'm sure the people who wrote this were well aware of that. So thank you for bringing that up. Again, I could go off on this story. If people have specific questions about it, I'm happy to. Like many of you probably don't know, that when I first had my first awakening, there was nothing available except Christian literature and the like. But I was fortunate enough to fall into more of the New Thought kind of thing, the metaphysics of it. And I just kind of buried myself in the Bible. I was in the Midwest. I mean, they had no access to anything. There was no self-help, none of that. Of Course in Miracles hadn't even been thought of yet, let alone written. And so this is where I went. So I just poured into these stories of what they meant and where they came from, because I just couldn't buy the literal, after the experience I'd had, the literal translation of crime and punishment and heaven and hell just made no sense. So was there anything there? Well, there was. And I began to discern the new tongue of what these stories were actually pointing at. So that's why, to this day, I mean, I buried myself in there until I ran across real non-dual teachings that were much more to the point, and they didn't bury it; they just said it. Which I thought, geez, why didn't I know this 15 years ago, right? So, but it's like, all right, well, better late than never. Here it is, and so I did the whole. I was pretty much a Bible scholar for a bit. But in a way that actually got me in a lot of trouble, even with the New Thought people that I was dealing with. It wasn't a happy time. I was awake and struggling, talking to God on one hand and completely dysfunctional on another. It's another story. But at any rate, I'm happy to engage in these conversations, about biblical stories, because there's so much a part of our culture. There's so much of a part of us. There's so much in us, right? And if one can see clearly what they really mean, it really can redeem a lot of the energy, and free us from the notion of the original sin and punishment and all that, and awaken us to original innocence and redemption, which is what the story is really all about. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Patang, yes. Thank you, Patang. Wonderful. David Maloney, hi. Did you come to Ireland, GP? I'd love to. The island you mentioned is one of the Aran Islands. I owe you a pint of Guinness for all the teachings you've given. Thank you, my friend. Wow, David, I would love to. I've said a million times, the only reason I'm not going all over the world is because nobody knows who I am. And I'd have to pay for it all myself, and there wouldn't be enough people there to even cover my expenses. If I could break even, I would love it. Yeah, I'm totally open to people anywhere in the world who can help me organize it to the point where I can actually afford it and make a little extra to pay my bills while I'm gone. That would be wonderful. And ultimately, I'm certain that my final resting place, my final home, is not going to be in the United States. I just know it. I'm not sure where it's going to be, but it's going to be some other. It's going to be some other country. Hopefully, one a little bit more sane. And I'll take you up on the pint of Guinness. Thank you for your answer, GP. Says Remington. You're welcome, as always. David Maloney, GP, I realized that I was trying to be a good meditator. Yeah, how well did that work for you? As soon as I accepted that a part of me really doesn't want to be in stillness, everything changed. I stopped fighting against my nature. Wonderful. What happened then? Because, yeah, I have a friend of mine who's a Zen master, right? And he's been a Zen master for 20 years, right? And he said he found himself, I mean, 5-10 years ago, falling asleep. Right? This guy has meditated for 40 years, right? And he's, I can't, he was having the same kind of thoughts. I can't, he's sitting in the front too, right? Right? He's not parked in the back somewhere. And he said, well, and I finally said, okay, so what? I'm going to fall asleep. He completely let go of it. Guess what? Never fell asleep again. Right? Just the opportunity to drop more resistance, to drop more of these ideas of what should be the good meditator, the good woman, the good man, the good anything, right? It's not that you're supposed to become a bad woman, bad man. You're supposed to, there's no rules. Your natural goodness emerges. Our natural love of and being drawn to the inner stillness, right, happens by itself. You don't need to make it happen. If any kind of spiritual practice is nothing but discipline, right, and there's no joy in it, drop it. Drop it. I'd rather you went and had a beer. Really, I'm serious. Because it's not doing anything for you. It's not helping you in the slightest. Right? It's actually reinforcing the sense of a separate self. I've got to do this. I've got to do this so I can wake up. Step back. Be gentle. Be kind. Be compassionate with yourself. Let yourself cultivate a love of the truth. That's really all it's about. I mean, I don't have to make you disciplined, to be with the one you love. I don't to discipline you to be with a beautiful piece of music or to look at a beautiful flower. I don't have to make it into a practice, right? In the beginning, we may have to explore it a bit because it holds the potential for it. But eventually, if that potential doesn't show up, you just can't keep doing it, right? I mean, if you kept trying to ride a bike and you could never do it, eventually you just stop. I don't care how many people tell you should do that. You should ride a bike. You could, but you can't. So it's you like keep falling off of it. And at first, though, you have to get on the bike because you see the promise that riding that bike holds for you, just like you see the promise of what meditation offers. So you get on it and you do it. Hopefully you get good instruction. Right? Unfortunately, a lot of meditation instruction is just misguided, sometimes downright distortions. It's not really it. Yeah, I don't want to go to the, do what feels good, man, because it's not that simple. But also don't beat yourself up about things. Don't force yourself, explore. That's probably the best word. Turn all of these things into an inner exploration, not a discipline. Because, the discipline is about getting something. It's the functional thing. Okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then I'm going to get that. And I do this, and I don't get that. Okay, do more, do harder. I mean, this is the whole, success model and stuff like that. The problem isn't with the steps or even with the ultimate destination. The problem is it's not an inner exploration. The joy comes from seeing truth. Oh, I get it. This is beautiful. When you see something beautiful, you're there. You're locked on. You don't have to discipline yourself. The more it becomes about exploring and discovering the truth, the less you'll need discipline and the easier this whole thing gets. How's that, Mr. Maloney? And I've actually made a note here, but you owe me a Guinness. You offered, I'm going to take you up. David and Elaine, would love to see you over in England. Me too. Where'd you go? Could buy you a pint of warm beer. You know, I've been to England. I like the bitters, and I don't mind the warm. We do drink it really cold here in the United States. Yeah. John M. says, what about the fear of hell? Well, the fear of hell is something that has been instilled in every single one of us. You know the word hell. It's funny. The word hell, that became hell through the Greek and into our modern world, simply meant, when Jesus used that, talked about your body being thrown into hell, it's based on the word Gehenna. And Gehenna was the name of the garbage dump of Jerusalem, where the fires burned day and night, right? Yes, they were burning garbage. It was a nasty place to be, right? So it was a great metaphor. He had no intention ever of saying that it was this place after you die that you go to that's filled with fire and brimstone for all eternity. It's such a horrible twist, distortion of the whole thing. But you know, as it moved through time, what got laid on that idea of hell are all of just the local customs and the ideas and the idea of the underworld. And basically we got saddled with the medieval thing, Hieronymus Bosch and all of that and all of that sort of thing. So we kind of got saddled with that idea of it, which is not at all what his intention was. What he was making reference to is the sense of yearning that is never fulfilled, which is the burning desire which is never fulfilled. And we need to look at our desires through that light. That desire, unfulfilled desire, is okay. I gotta be careful with this, because people often, I shouldn't have any desires, and then people are immediately trying to get rid of all their desires. Buddha, it was really beautiful the way Buddha put it, because he's often been credited, you overcome desires, be free of all desires. And it's true to be free of attachment to desires. But what he was really pointing out to is, it is hell, an unrequited a desire that can never be fulfilled if your desire is for something that doesn't exist. And what we suffer because we are desiring something that doesn't exist. Namely, we are searching for happiness in things. It isn't there. It doesn't exist in things. Therefore, it can never be found there. As long as you keep doing that, you'll be creating a hellish experience, because it cannot possibly be fulfilled. And that the desire for that is the egoic mind. The egoic mind cannot be satisfied. It is the definition of dissatisfaction. Its nature is unhappiness, whereas the nature of the self is happiness, right? Happiness needs to be discovered as our nature. When it is our nature, there's no need to desire for it. Now that doesn't mean desires don't arise. They do. Of course they do. Life is nothing but desire. Without desire, life would be over in a couple days, right? You wouldn't eat, nothing. You just, right? So desire and life are one. You know, we think of life as a thing, but all life is the functioning of desire, expansion, growth, interaction, intermingling, unity. I mean, constantly. That's all it is. That's going to go on. If I don't project my happiness on that, and turn it into something that I'm supposed to get. Instead, I experience it from the point of view of happiness. I now see life as it actually is, and it's blissful. Now, all of everything life has to offer you is yours for the taking. And it can do you no harm. But if I'm seeking happiness in it, I'll never be satisfied. That's hell. That's hell. Of course, the desire for something that can never be satisfied, right? You either have to get rid of the desire or you're going to suffer forever. But if you can't get rid of the desire, if it's your nature, right? And the nature, of course, is to desire happiness. But if you desire happiness where it isn't, you're in hell. You've just been thrown into the garbage dump and you're wandering around through just a bunch of burning crap looking for happiness. It's not there. So that's what hell represents. That's all it means. It's an internal state. And it should be noted that in the story of Moses, since we're doing, Bible stuff, Moses talking to the burning bush, that the word burning, referencing to the bush, if you look it up in a Hebrew dictionary, one of the meanings of it is mental turmoil, right? So what we're really talking about is Moses turning his attention directly at the center of his suffering. And in the middle of that suffering, when he turned his attention fully right to the center of it, not the seeking of something outside, right at that moment, he heard the voice of God, right at the center of it, the voice of his true self. Yeah, enough of that, though. Okay. Robert Hill. Hi, Mr. G. I used to teach music in grade school. That's what I taught in a private school, and they had, I was honored to be called Greg, which was a name. I mean, that's what G stands for. And so they had these rules. It was a little more formal and stuff. So they always had to call you Mr. And everybody was, Mr. Walsh, Mr. whatever. So I just had the kids call me Mr. Greg. I fulfilled the rule. It's always a bit of a rebel. Anyway, I'm able to not think and be aware, but sometimes anxiety in my body comes up, panic attacks. Sometimes I need a pill to calm. I awaken mentally, but my body resists surrendering. Very good. Very good. Before you run for the pill, sit with it. Right? The reason you're running for the pill, and again, I'm not telling you not to take it because it would be cruel of me. Yes, sometimes things get intense enough that you need a little relief. Take it. So please don't say this is something. But before you do, notice the way the mind is engaged as well. Yes, there's a resistance in the body, but that resistance in the body can only be sustained by some kind of story that we're still engaged in, right? So somehow, for some long line, you got the idea that if you're fully awake, you wouldn't feel that anxiety. You wouldn't feel a panic attack. It's not true, because you are awake and you're feeling a panic attack. If you weren't awake, you couldn't feel it, right? You'd be out. You'd be unconscious or non-existent. It is awakeness that is feeling the panic attack. So what you're really reacting to is not the sensation in the body, but the story about it, that somehow it's not supposed to be there. So I'm not awake, right? And I'm sure you're hard on yourself about that. How do I wake up so I don't have panic attacks? Let the panic attack be in the awakeness and watch what happens, right? It'll lose its sting. And just turn towards it. Go as much into it as you possibly can. To completely take away all the story and just feel it as sensations in the body, right? Which is, the sense of the separate self in the body. And just do it all the way. And if it really does become too overwhelming, take a pill. Fine, right? I'm not saying not to. But I'm just saying, don't rush into it, right? Notice that there is an underlying story there. It's very subtle, it's very quiet, that somehow I shouldn't be feeling this. It's that shouldn't be feeling it that is giving it the intensity and the overwhelmingness of it. If that story is not there, it's just a sensation with no meaning, with no past, with no future. Right? This feeling is in my body right now. Right? That feeling has never been there before. There may be had been another one 3 days ago that felt just like it, but it's not the same. That's gone. This is new. Oh, it's just this feeling in this moment. That's it. That's all it is. It shouldn't be here. No, it should be here. How do I know it should be here? Because it's here. So just let it. Just say, okay, be here. Completely surrender to it the way Christ surrendered to his crucifixion. This is your crucifixion. Right? This is your invitation to think that somehow you're not awake. Somehow there's something wrong with you. Somehow you're off the track. Everybody else is on the track. Don't buy it. It's not true. And then please, next week, let me know what happened. Starlight Glimmer says, thanks, GP. Oh, and then Robert says, I have to add, after I awakened and transformed my life, all kinds of feelings and trauma started to come up. Yes, and I'm still dealing with it. When will it stop? I'm a very happy man nonetheless. Or nevertheless, yes, it'll stop when it stops. And the less importance you give it, right? There's no badge of honor when this stuff stops. You know, it might not. Right? I mean, the true measure is, can you be with that for the rest of your life? When the answer to that is yes, you've really let go of it. Doesn't matter. So who cares if it comes up? Right? It's only the story about it coming up that causes you suffering. The actual feeling coming up itself isn't causing the suffering. Trust me on this. It's the meaning you give it, the meaning that is reflecting back, that's very subtly telling you, see, you're not the real self. You're not awake. Duh. You're not awake, dummy. Listen to that. Notice that. Go, oh, gotcha. I get it. No story at all. It's just a feeling. And when it's just a sensation, it has lost all its power. Because it doesn't actually have any. The power is the story you give it. Thank you for that, Robert. That's very, very powerful. And I love these like really direct, immediate, concrete things. Everybody's going to be blessed by hearing about that. Thank you. Thank you. What are we doing on time? We got about 20 minutes here. Good. Okay. Cameron. Oh, do you have anything to say on accepting this present moment just as it is? Yeah, I do. I find that often when I want to accept it, a trying and anxious force takes over me and I feel more locked up. Thanks. Yes, that's exactly what happens. Because, yes, first off, let me make it very clear. You do want to accept it, right? The resistance to accepting it is not you, right? You wouldn't, you resisted it before, but you didn't notice it because you weren't awake to it yet. You were so identified with it, you didn't think anything of it. It is the awakening that is making it obvious that you want to accept it. You've already seen, oh, wait, this is going on here, and there's me over here. That sense, I just want to accept it, that I is the true self, which in fact has already accepted it. And you know it's already accepted it because it's here. If it didn't, it wouldn't be here at all, right? So the true self has accepted, did I say separate self? I think I said true self, but anyway. The true self has already accepted it because it's here. So its awareness has said, fine, it's here. Now identify with that. That's already said fine to it. And don't expect it that, like I was saying to Robert, you don't have to make it go away. You don't have, that's not a measurement of anything. Things coming and going are not a measurement. It is simply the equanimity that is sitting completely present with it. So when you say a trying and anxious force takes over me, don't resist that either. It's part of the same mechanism. Step back, just take another step back. Oh yeah, there's resistance. Duh, Yeah, there's resistance. I want to accept this present moment. No, I don't. Right? The ego is going to go, no, I don't. I hate this present moment. This moment sucks. I don't want this. It's supposed to be like that. Blah, 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 blah. And on it goes, right? Right? So that's the anxious force. The desire to simply let this moment be as it is the true self, right? That's the real you. That's okay with it. It's quite, and in fact, it's already accepted it. Let me drive this point home. It's already accepted it because it's here, right? If it didn't accept it, it would not be here. It couldn't get into awareness in the first place. So awareness, your true nature, has already accepted it. And now, also, what's arising is the resistance of the egoic mind. Guess what? Awareness has already accepted that too. So take a bigger step back and go, oh, there's the resistance. There's the desire to accept. There's the reality of acceptance that's already happened. And then there's resistance. There's these thoughts. And those ideas that things should be different than they are, they go on for a while. And look around. You're being bombarded with it in the media and friends and everywhere. Oh, this should be different. You shouldn't be doing that. And everybody's got an opinion about how things should be. Right? And so we're constantly bombarded with, you should take a stand. This shouldn't be like this, right? Just notice that is also the functioning of the conditioned pattern, and it isn't important. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't get lost in it. Yep, the anxious feeling of force takes over me. No, it doesn't. It appears to you. And then there's a thought that says, this took me over, right? The actual feeling itself did not take you over. It just appeared. But because there's a resistance to it, I don't want to feel that, but I can't make it go away, the thought says, well, it took me over because it's acting against my will. But it's the will of the egoic mind, not you, right? An anxious force arose. Now go deeply into that feeling as the anxious force arises. Right? Notice that it is a sensation. It's something you're feeling. It's in the body. There's a clenching. There's a tension. There's a defensiveness. There's fear. There's anxiety. There's stuff that's arising. It's great. It's fine, right? Something's been triggered that thinks there's danger. No story. Right? Even calling it an anxious force turns it into something. Yeah, we need these words so we can communicate with one another. But the word you chose, anxious force. So I know you're feeling a sense of fear, right? A sense of fear or resistance to that sort of thing. The moment you call it force, you've made it an external entity with power now that you have to deal with. It's not a force. It's a feeling. Feelings are not forced. They're natural. They just arise, right? So it's not even a force. It is simply a sensation. So now, force is gone. It's not a force. It's not a power. It's not doing anything. It's not grabbing you. There's nobody there going, I can't. But then there's this thought that says, I want to make it go away. I can't make it go away. Therefore, it's got me. It has taken me over, right? No, it hasn't. That's also another thought arising out of the fact of a more subtle thought that says, this shouldn't be here. It is here. That's a fact, right? No way to duck it. Oh, there it is, right? So if there's no thought that says this shouldn't be here, is this going to be an anxious force taking you over? Or is it just going to be a feeling? Right? Notice, it's the thought that wants to resist it, that says it shouldn't be here, right? Which is in fact exactly, and it's actually pretty beautiful, poetic actually, because what are you trying to do? Accept this moment, right? Okay, so accept it, do it, right? Accept this moment, which means there's an anxiety, there's these thoughts trying to interpret, it's a force taking me over, all of that's happening right in this moment. Accept it, right? Sink into that perfect place of allowing, that perfect yoga of allowing. And I think you'll find the whole thing passes very quickly. Right? You're going to see it as it actually is. And you're going to, and in the process, You're going to actually like the fact that it happened this way because you're now a whole lot wiser than you were. Not wiser theoretically, wiser practically, because you actually saw it in operation and you went, gotcha. Thank you, Cameron. Beautiful. Teresa Hoy says, good evening, G. Thanks for being with us. Oh, Teresa, my pleasure. Thank you for being with me. Thank you all for being with me. It is, yeah, thank you all for being with me. You don't know how much I appreciate you, and like. Anne, loving seeing your white blossoms against the dark background of picture. At first thought they were part of the picture. Oh yeah, the my orchids. I'm not very good with plants, so I actually have to find plants that are really hardy and last. And orchids, ta-da! It's like once a week I have to put a couple ice cubes in there, which slowly drain. Although if anybody wants to give me advice on how to take care of plants, I would more than welcome it. Yeah, it does kind of look like it's part of the picture, doesn't it? Yeah, that's great. But nope, it isn't. It's separate. Whoop. So is that. So is my crystal ball. Cameron, message retracted. Okay, I guess I answered the question. David and Elaine, many thanks again, GP, for the clarity of your answer to our previous question. So, put simply, seeking and spiritual practice. Yes. Take place until they don't, and the need or desire for them falls away. That's it. Yes. When the need to seek or not seek, the moment seeking, there's actually a point in the process where you think, oh, I shouldn't be seeking, and now we try to seek not seeking. It's like, my God, the things we do to ourselves. And I got to tell you, folks, I mean, the reason I'm so good at pointing this stuff out is because I don't think there's anything I missed in terms of all the wrong ways to do it. I'm really adept at spotting all this because I don't think there's a single buffoonish mistake I haven't made. My age, I collected a lot of them. Even after my initial awakening, when I was very young, I mean, my life was hell for a long time, and it was a struggle. One mistake after another. So, relish the mistakes as well. They're not lost. They will serve you and humanity well. Anne said, where'd you go, Anne? There you are. I am the self. What is the value of directing my day? You don't direct your day, right? Notice that you say, I am the self, and then you say, I'm directing the day, as if there was something else about the day that needed to be directed. The day is unfolding from the self, right? That question would come from the place of feeling a sense of personal responsibility about the unfolding of events in the day, right? That sense of a personal responsibility for the events of the day is a subtle presence of the sense of a separate self. That's the part that is saying, I'm not the self. If I was the self, why would I be directing my day? You are the self, and the day is being directed. And however the day unfolds, in whatever order, with whatever level of engagement or decision making happens, is fine, right? Right. If you make a big deal out of it, like it's something that should be done and it should be different, well, you basically have created chaos and suffering where there isn't any, right? I mean, you've created only within your own consciousness. It doesn't actually exist as a real entity. Is that clear, Anne? I know it's a short answer. I don't need to go off on that one long. If you are the self, then the day's just unfolding, and you are the self. So the day is just unfolding. There's only a sense that the day is being organized and directed and controlled, but that sense is the separate self. Remember, there isn't anything as the separate self. When I use the term separate self, I'm referring to that sense, personal responsibility, the sense of suffering, the sense of needing control, the sense of attachment and aversion. it's a sense. It's just a feeling, right? You could sum that up as being the egoic mind, the personal self, the separate self, the person. Many, many different words. The ego, many different words you might kind of apply to it, but it's just that sense. Okay? But that sense appears to who? It appears to the self. And the self is not a thing. It's not an entity that's aware, sitting somewhere. The self is simply the consciousness that is hearing my words right now. That's it. That's all there is to this. I know, it's easy for you to say, right? No, it isn't. I mean, it did not come easy, right? I had huge insights. I mean, just amazingly huge insights, Here I am, 17-year-old, 19-year-old, talking to God, right? But the whole unfoldment of the thing did not come easily. I was a tough case. I still see parts of it. I still see resistant parts of God. Okay. Okay, fine. Anyway, love you. I love you, Dan. Dan. Love you, Dan, too. Although there's no Dan here today. James Breeden, GP, your channel is top of the line, my brother. Whoa, thank you. Wonderful. Great. I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, I love the clarity. I'm, like I say, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I oftentimes, if not all the time, I'm hearing it for the first time, as you are. I mean, a lot of things that get said I've heard before, so it's like I recognize them. Yeah, I've heard that before, but I'm not the originator of it. That is, this body functioning thing is not the originator of it. The clarity that comes is the clarity that's coming from truth. It's not coming from me, this personal me, which doesn't actually even exist. It's just this form, right? The self simply speaks, and so there's clarity, and that's what people recognize. They say it's wisdom, but it's not anybody's wisdom. It is wisdom. It is Prajnaparamita. It is the wisdom. It is the Buddha wisdom. It doesn't belong to anybody, right? And everybody has access to exactly the same thing. As a matter of fact, it is always speaking through everyone, whether it be a question or an answer. So thank you. Thank you for that. Please like and share. Starlight Glimmer. Do you know Marianne Williamson? I was shocked to see some talking about love in this past week's debates. Yes, I know her. Actually, she's a member of an organization, the TLC, that I am. And I've met her, and I've actually had lunch with her. And she was in the audience when I gave a talk at that place. And yes, there's others. I have a couple other friends who actually are giving, they're business consultants, high-end executives and stuff, talking about love, right? Why not? Another friend of mine talks about heaven. He's talking about heaven on earth, right? And they say, you can't say that in business. He says, why not? We talk about hell on earth. Why not heaven, right? I love seeing the debate go there. I love seeing that element come up. I won't make my decision as to who I think should be president of the United States based solely on that. But the fact that it's telling that such a thing could even make it to that level of debate, could even make it to that stage, don't you think? It's pretty amazing that it could even make it there, let alone actually have a nationwide audience for it. And she, of course, is the most visible person for that to happen, and a very interesting lady. Like I said, I do know her, not really well. I've had a chance to sit and talk with her, and we're move in some of the same circles. So, but I'm delighted to see that kind of conversation begin to happen there. What I want to see is to see that showing up as obvious programs and change and ways in which we can make the entire culture move towards love. That's a bigger job. But this is the opening salvo of what's going to be a very big and very wonderful job. And I believe it's going to happen. Not necessarily may come through her, it may not, but it is coming because it's not coming from her, remember? It's coming through her, just like it comes through me, just like it comes through any spiritual teacher. It's coming through her, which means consciousness itself is saying, it's time, I'm done, I'm waking up. So Steve Borowski, there's no love in politics, don't be fooled by the jive. There can be. There isn't now, no. And there's no compassion in it. There's no kindness in it. I mean, we've gone away from that. But it is, but there could be. And for that to open, it will transform politics. It won't be politics anymore. There are really beautiful alternatives to the way we're running and ruining the world. And eventually we will adopt them. If we don't, it's over for this grand experiment. Thank you, Steve. Paramjit Dio. Hey, Mr. G, any advice on vasanas and latent desires? Yeah, don't fight them. When somebody, you heard my previous question about somebody that the resistance was coming up. They want to accept things as they are, but that resistance is coming up. That resistance is a vasana. It's not personal. The vasanas are the deepest attachments to the sense of being a sense of self, a separate self. They're the deepest attachment to it. So deep that they transcend lifetimes. But resistance, it's a vasana. We feel it as resistance, as fear. All of these things at the root are the vasanas, and they are simply the deepest seeds of a personal sense of identity. And in terms of latent desires, do I have time to go into this? Not really. Vasanas and resistance are actually resistance to the natural desire of life. And they happen because the vasanas represent the attachment to being a separate self. And the separate self then wants to grab and control life. So it grabs and controls desire. It's my desire. I got to fulfill this desire, right? And if I'm thwarted, I'll work even harder to. But the desires do not belong to a separate self. They belong to life. And life is the manifestation of the self. It is this self pondering itself. That's what life actually is. And so the vasana is nothing other than that persistent resistance. We think, I've had my awakening, this grand experience. I had another fellow a little bit earlier that talking about the awakening and all this stuff was happening. That's the vasanas. The more you awaken, the more they're going to surface until finally they're completely burnt forever. Don't fret it. The way to deal with them is the same way you deal with anything else. You simply be with it. Take the story away and go deeply into the feeling itself. And notice that there's a sensation and feelings, and then there's a story about it. It's the story that is creating the suffering. It is the story that is being generated by the vasanas. You could call the vasanas the ultimate unconscious mind. In Buddhism, they call it the repository consciousness. And so just know that every time you're just completely accepting this moment as it is, you are standing as the self, you are abiding as the self, and you are burning up the vasanas. And they'll be there, and you'll see them. But if you don't go with them, if you don't take a side against this feeling or attachment to try to grab onto that feeling and hold on, this felt really good, I want more of that, you are burning up the remaining seeds of a false identity. So, great question. Thank you. Running a little short, so I may rush a bit. Robert Hill, thank you very much. My girlfriend also listened and likes you already. much love. Very good. What's your girlfriend's name so I can say hello? Cameron, My love, GP. Thank you for offering this, truly. Oh, you're more than welcome. It's not a hardship. It's my joy. I love doing this. I could do it all day, and sometimes I do. Ava says, yes, your being with us is extremely precious today. Something you have told me reached so deeply, I don't want now to express it in words. Good, because I feel I need to feel this and not cover with words. Very good. Oftentimes Muji would say, or Papa G would say, just be quiet. When something sinks in like that, I do that. Somebody just got me go, just be quiet. Because the teacher in me wants, okay, how do I express this? I'm already on. Of course, I never need to. And even if I do say, how am I going to express it? I never do it that way. It happens spontaneously. So it's really a waste of time. But nonetheless, right? It's kind of a tendency of the mind to recreate a new the new identity. So when you have a deep insight that takes you, don't immediately run with it. Don't immediately share it. Don't immediately try to do something with it, right? That's the separate self trying to take a hold of it. Just be quiet with it. Just go, wow. Just let it sink into your heart and love it, appreciate it, cherish it as a very special private gift to you. And then it will reveal how to give it self-expression. It will express through you. You're not expressing it. It's expressing you. Awareness. Ari Marianne Williamson. Most people do not seem to understand where she is coming from. I've seen several articles making fun of her. So should she still go there? She has to go where her nature leads her. She has to go which is her mission. Sometimes it's a tough one to call because, when you get on a national stage like that, there's going to be all sorts of people around you telling you how you should present yourself. I mean, I'm nowhere near a stage like that, but I get people say, oh, gee, you got to worry about this branding. Oh, that picture's a little bit wrong. You should wear this color shirt and stuff like that. And you kind of listen, but then eventually you're going to go, fuck that. I mean, this is just me. And it's going to, and of course, the higher you get, the position she's getting into, the more pressure is going to be for that. So it just kind of comes with the territory. Will she still go there? Will she tone it down? Will she beef it up? Will it become slogans and the like? Remains to be seen. I hope not. I hope she just stays true to herself and is just herself, and doesn't make concessions thinking it's going to help her get elected, because that concession is what opens the slippery slope down until all you're doing is making concessions and the actual substance is lost. And that's what happens to politicians for the most part. Very few exceptions. Anyway, Parmeet Jeet says, thank you. You are well says, thanks once again. Robert Hill says, Anna. Hello, Anna. Thank you for joining us. Robert Hill, you should have 1 million followers. Well, like and share, right? Like and share 1 million times, maybe. We need to share and like people. Thank you, Robert. David and Elaine. Good night, GP. Love and blessings, Robert. Good night. Thank you for being here. Thank you all. Sometimes I just get so overwhelmed with the wonder and beauty of this, and just the utter potential for freedom that it represents. So, yeah, maybe there will be 1 million of us at some point, but I'm happy with the 43 that are here, and the 50. There's usually around, over the course of it, there's usually like 70 to 80 people, which is like great. So, thank you all. Love you. Namaste.